So we're going to take a quick look at how the native Storeganise Xero add-on works and how that automatically syncs your invoice and payment data from Storeganise into Xero without any manual intervention needed on a daily basis. So this is primarily going to be for those that are setting up the Xero add-on. So those are generally going to be the accountants or the people on the finance team or the founders of the business that are running the accounts in Xero and managing the main settings within Storeganise. So within our main settings of the business, we'll have two main pieces that are going to be relevant to what we're talking about today. We've got the invoicing settings and the accounting settings. All right. So invoicing settings are probably at this point are less relevant to the Xero add-on in this main setting, but it's going to define kind of the currency codes. This is something that you'd usually set up one time for the business, how the customers are charged each month, when we consider them overdue, and then the invoice generation settings, which is quite important as this will determine whether you're billing customers on a date of month model, on an anniversary model. And in each of those, then when do invoices get created, charged, and in the case of date of month, things like the start date of those invoices and when we prorate periods. So if you're on a date of month billing, 99% of the time, we're going to see the invoice period start date as 1. And what that means is that we're putting everybody onto the first of the month, and new move-ins, we just prorate their rent up until the end of the month. And then everybody from that point onward is just billed on the first of the month. We might be creating the invoices, for example, on the 20th, charging them on the 28th, but all periods would start on the 1st. So as an example, for September period, invoices will get generated August 20th, and they'll be charged on the 28th of August for that period. So that's kind of the invoice generation settings. One important part for the Xero integration is going to be what we call the manual payment methods. So this will determine the different payment methods that you accept outside of your payment gateway, let's say Stripe, Molly, and so on. And so oftentimes these will be, if you're accepting bank transfers, for example, those bank transfers could go into one or multiple different bank accounts. And so when we set these up, we're going to be inputting not just the title, but the most important piece here is the code that then matches with the bank account code in Xero as well. So for example, if I look up 090 in my chart of accounts in my demo here, you can see it links up to my business bank account. So any payment that's added to an invoice in Storeganise with HSBC savings account selected, that will sync that payment to this bank account in Xero when that payment is received. And then let's jump into the accounting settings. So again, this is an important part for the general setup of Storeganise and how account codes and tax rates are handled, but also in your integration with Xero. Usually a one-time setup as to whether you're treating prices as inclusive or exclusive of tax, and then the different account codes that you use to track your line items within invoices, right? So we've got some examples here, and within each of these, we've got a description, title basically, the code, and then the tax rates that apply. So if I look up in my chart of accounts in Xero, this code in Storeganise always needs to match up with a relevant code in Xero as well. So you can see here, I've got my rental income account code here. Ignore the fact that the tax might be different. These are just demo accounts, but essentially this is to have a like-for-like matching between a line item and an invoice in Storeganise. And then when that syncs into Xero, it allocates that directly to the correct account code from Storeganise into Xero. Okay. System charges for the purposes of the Xero integration aren't really relevant. These are just determining default account codes that will be used for certain charge types. So now that we looked at the main settings, what we're going to look at is the Xero add-on settings. Now, the Xero add-on can be installed through the add-on settings, either at the site level or at the business level. Difference being that if it's at the business, it'll use the same details, syncing one Storeganise account and all your sites into Xero for one account. If you happen to have different Xero accounts for different sites, then you can install the Xero add-on at the site level and be able to sync the data accordingly from one site in Storeganise to one business in Xero. Okay, so when we look at the add-on itself, There's more instructions obviously here. Those can be read separately along with our help docs, but some of the main settings that are going to be relevant are down here. Okay, so as I was saying, the main piece that needs to happen before we jump into this is making sure that the account codes in Storeganise and the bank account codes in Storeganise match up with the correct one in Xero, and that you have a like-for-like matching for those. Otherwise, the systems won't know where to put that information. Essentially, what we're looking to do is to have Xero replicate like-for-like the data that's in Storeganise at the invoice level and at the payments level. Okay, so the main pieces that are relevant here: a default account. This is really just a fallback. All of your invoice line items should generally have an account code associated with them, but this is really just to catch as a fallback in case anything doesn't have one. We always want to make sure that there's one passed to Xero, so you can set a default account for that, and then the default account for payments. Now, if you're using Stripe, that might be Stripe. If you're using Molly, that might be Molly. But again, the code here is going to match with what you have it set up in Xero. So in Xero, while it might be a Stripe account, your code might be, you know, a numerical value or alphanumerical, in which case that's what you would put here, right? So this is just to match the code of that account. And the reason this is the default one, so by default, your payments are mostly going to be coming through your payment gateway. And so this will make sure that any payment transactions feed correctly into the correct bank account in Xero. Now, when you have your bank account set up in Xero, the correct way of doing this is to leverage bank feeds wherever possible. So if you're using HSBC, for example, you'll have a bank feed set up that will automatically send the line items from your bank account into Xero so that you can reconcile transactions against payments received. This is probably something you're already familiar with if you're using Xero. The same thing would generally apply with the likes of Stripe, where you would have the live data feed set up so that when a transaction happens in Stripe, the amount comes through as a receipt into Xero, and then there is a line item that will be the charge of any processing fees, right? So those are not things that we charge, but the payment gateway charges. And so let's say we have an invoice of £100 in Storeganise, and we take payment via Stripe for £100. Storeganise will first off sync that invoice from Storeganise into Xero. There'll be the same information, so the invoice ID, customer information will be synced, and then the line item. So let's say it's £75 for rent and £25 for an admin fee, be allocated into those corresponding ones, and a separate transaction will come through as the payment logged against that. So you'll see a payment allocated to the Stripe account, and when you then go into Xero on the Stripe account, you'll be able to click on your reconciliations and be able to reconcile the payment against that invoice. So you'll see a receipt of 100 in Xero tied to the invoice that was synced, and then you'll see the transaction fees as a separate charge, which will be your credit card processing fees, which you then map according to whatever that charge account is in Xero. That's generally how you're going to be doing your reconciliation processes. That's why that piece is important over there. The skip Xero amount invoices. So in Storeganise, how things work is that we have a realized revenue model on the invoices. So as and when, if a customer prepays you for 3 months, you will have, again, let's go with the £100 a month. We receive £300 from them. That'll be allocated as a prepayment. Again, an important part of when we looked at the account settings, right? So we've got our prepayment account, right? Again, this should match up with your deferred revenue or prepayment account in Xero, the same code, and it will allocate that to that deferred revenue account. Each month, as the customer, the Storeganise will still generate an invoice. It will credit your revenue for £100 and then debit your prepayment or deferred revenue account by £100. So this will create this natural realized revenue model in Xero, and it matches up. In the case that you don't want those $0 invoices to feed through, let's say, for example, you're doing cash accounting and you account for all of the things upon receipt, then you might skip the Xero here. And then tracking categories and category options. More details on this are in our help docs, but at a high level, this will give you the ability in Xero, there is a way that you can, even if you've got one business in Xero, but you've got different locations or different sites, you can use tracking categories to identify which site the certain revenue is for. And then there'll be reports in Xero where you can create P&Ls specifically by different, what they call categories, and those to you might be locations. Okay. The resync invoices to Xero. So Xero is not a live feed in that it doesn't happen every single time an invoice is generated. Xero has limits in terms of how much can be pushed via the API. So we do that on a daily basis. There's a daily run. The Xero information will feed from Storeganise into Xero so that you don't hit issues with the Xero API. But in the case that you need to resync any invoices, you can do that by just clicking here, clicking on this, and then clicking update. That'll just sync any new invoices and payments directly into Xero. And then finally, the default tax type. Again, more information is here. Most of the time, you'll leave this blank. This is a little bit more specific to certain countries. And so in certain cases, you might want this to be output, but more details are covered in the Xero docs that will explain what the right methodology would be for you. Access tokens, these are all going to be filled in automatically by the system when you complete the authorization of Xero with Storeganise's Xero Add-on. So that'll be part of clicking this enable button will take me through an onboarding process of me confirming within Xero that I want Storeganise the authority to send that invoice and payment details. So to recap, the Xero Add-on does give you that automated feed on a daily basis of all your invoice data and payment data. The idea being that Xero then has everything correctly allocated to the correct account code so that you can drive your P&L reports in Xero without any issues. And on the payments level, assuming you have things set up correctly in Xero and have direct bank feeds for as many of your bank accounts as possible, it simplifies things because your payments are already sent from Storeganise. You've got your receipts on your bank accounts. So then you go into your reconciliation page on Xero and just click to approve the reconciliation. It'll match them. 95% of the time, they'll be matched correctly. In some cases, again, you're familiar if you're using Xero that there might be a couple of different transactions that are similar. You might say, okay, well, I want to match this to a different one. But 95% plus of your transactions will just be a click and approve, and that'll match the invoice and the payment directly without any other action required.